road. Bittersweet to a brand new future. Eyes on the road. Don't carry burdens no one uses. Don't even measure the time. Big pages, worn out verses. Right away from here. Free from the mold. Pack up the smiles and the warm embraces. Leave behind the cold. You got away with your funny phrases and the light in your eyes. Build a love into empty spaces. It's all around. Light shines in strangest places. Love is all around. It's where you are. Love is all around. Life moves in strangest places. Love is all around. It's where you are. Where you are. Wipe away your tears. Reach for the road. Lift yourself to a new horizon. Breathe in the cold. Troubles come like a dime for the dozen. Who can answer why? We don't wait for the shortcut. We just fly. Love is all around. Light shines in the strangest places. Love is all around. It's where you are. Love is all around. Light moves in strangest places. Love is all around. It's where you are.
Well, welcome to our 7th podcast of Black and White Let's Talk. This is a podcast featuring Robert Johnson, pastor of St. Mark United Methodist Church in Wichita, Kansas, soon to be moving to Resurrection United Methodist Church in Leawood, Kansas in July. Boy, will we miss you. Wichita is going to miss you, but we're glad you're not going that far away. And Dan Stockamer, founder of Prairie Hill Vineyard, a lovely venue a few miles west of Wichita, and me, Jan Fox Peterson, former school psychologist, current relationship coach, and restorative practices advocate. Before we get started, we have 2 important announcements. First, Pastor Johnson is celebrating his 1-year anniversary of the publication of his very important and outstanding book, Jesus Unchained. So, Pastor, we were just going to ask you to tell us a couple things about the purpose of your book and what's going on with that.
Hey, thank you for giving me an opportunity to do that. So that's a picture of it real quick, Jesus Unchained. It's available from Amazon. You can also get it straight from our publisher, Invite Resources. First of all, let me say a quick thing about Invite Resources out of Dallas, Texas, Plano, Texas, is a new, relatively new publishing company that was created to take Abingdon, which is a United Methodist publishing resource, typically focuses on theology, biblical studies. Invite does stuff that's more for lay people. And so it's with this publishing company. Jesus Unchained was written as a way to deal with the idolatries of Christians and how those idolatries push us to a place where we create perversions of the Christian faith that impede the impact of Christ. And so that's basically what the book is about. Very excited about it. It's been out a year now. It's done very well, but it's getting a second round. Typically, books have the first 3 months and then they kind of disappear. But Jesus Unchained, local churches find out about it, they buy it and do book studies. So it keeps having a second birth, and we're very excited about the future impact this book will have. It was fun to write. It was life-changing to write, and it's a joy to see that it's still impacting people's lives.
It's great, and it's so needed and really timely. So then, second, Sunday is a big event at Prairie Hill Vineyard. Rootstock, a day of peace, love, and potted plants. So Dan, you get to tell us a bit about this big event that you have created. And we've got to have you unmute.
There we go. I should have thought that through. Okay, well, anyway, Rootstock is like, I know most of you, nobody hardly made it to Woodstock, right? So now we get a chance to go to Rootstock. But this really meant to be a family event that's going to be all day long from 1 to 8. And so you could come, or you could stick the whole day, or just come later in the afternoon. But all kinds of things from the Sedgwick County Master Gardeners are represented by Christy McCullough, and then Kansas Native Plant Society by Krista, and then Thomas Montiel with Montiel Farms, and Dave Sala with Grace Hill Winery. And then we have all these great local bands playing Meets Ghosts. Phil Stacy's going to be there sometimes on Sunday. Pretend Friend, Dustin Arbuckle, and the three of us isn't even on this poster, but they're going to be there too. It's going to be a great day. We'll have food trucks. I'm giving hay rack rides all day long. And so come and see me. If you do come, I'll be giving hay rack rides, and I'd be happy to give you one too. So that's it for Rootstock.
Well, we hope everybody will come out, because these bands, it's music. It's just going to be so fun. So we want to make sure we give credit to our friends in the band sometimes on Sunday for giving us permission to play our opening and closing song, Love is All Around. Love is all around despite everything, and that is our premise of our podcast. And sometimes on Sunday are going to be featured at Prairie Hill Vineyard along with the other great bands of the Haymakers and Pretend Friends. It's going to be Pretend Friend. It's going to be a great time. So tonight, our guest is Jim Yoder, someone that I have known for a bit and highly respect. He is a longtime facilitator of Wichita's Survivors of Suicide Loss Support Group. The acronym for this group is SOS. SOS in Wichita is one of the largest suicide survivor support groups in the country and serves the greater part of Kansas. So Jim lost his beloved wife, Tammy, 11 years ago this week to suicide, and has worked with many hundreds of survivors of this very complicated and tragic loss. People who have lost loved ones to suicide face many complex grief challenges, of which our society has minimal understanding, and often therapists and other professionals have no specific suicide loss grief training. So the journey of suffering for survivors often becomes very isolating, painful, arduous, and long. So this is a really tough topic tonight, but it's an important one because suicide affects every walk of life and backgrounds. People of all genders, ages, and ethnicities are at risk for suicide. It is truly a serious health problem, and for survivors, it may be one of the most challenging experiences to go through of their entire lifetime. So our quote to set the tone for this evening is, to anyone out there who's hurting, it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's a sign of strength. And that was by Barack Obama. So Jim, just to get started, to start our conversation this evening, we'd like you to first just tell us a little bit about Jim Yoder, where you grew up, and a few of the defining moments in your life.
All right. Thank you, Jane.
For you to be here. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me. I always take advantage of any opportunity I have to spread awareness and understanding about not just suicide and the scourge that it is in our world, but also the aftermath, those left behind. was a part of this world I never knew until it happened to me. So again, thank you. So let's see where to start. I guess born in Dallas, spent a little time in Denver. Dad was a psychiatrist, and when he finished up his training at University of Texas, moved to Denver for his first job, and then back home to Harvey County, where he was born and raised on a farm and wanted to really get back. So spent the rest of his career at Prairie View, medical director, chief of psychiatry, the whole 9 yards there. So mom was a nurse, dad was a doctor, grew up in that type of a world. I'm one of 5 adopted children. So that's part of who I am as well. And it was my first aspect of my life that I was aware that people around me did not understand and could not understand, and would ask questions, about that experience. And it's something that has really been a major issue, with suicide loss survivors, that other people just don't get this. They don't understand. And it's one of many life experiences that if you haven't lived it yourself, you really can't understand. You can understand aspects of it and to some degree, but much like I can't understand what it's like to give birth to a child. As an empathetic, man, I can probably understand as well as any man, or maybe more than many, but I still will never be able to say I understand. It's not even a statement I use anymore with people with situations. So with a name like Yoder, you can imagine I grew up in an old Mennonite church, and the hallmarks of the Mennonite faith are, service to others in Christ's name. And that has always been a part of my dad's life that was very important, as well as my own. It's just pretty much the doctrine and ministry of that. It's about not just being a believer of Christ, but being a follower, and thereby focusing as much on salvation. We focus on caring for others, spreading his love, and living out what he taught and what he modeled when he was here. So that's a core element of who I am. So that's just in a nutshell who I am. I've been in the professional world for a long time. Still have a few years left to go. Had kind of an interesting career path, and I think if you looked at my career path, you'd say, well, all the times that you set these goals for yourself and you think you have your life planned out, you're going to have to be reactive, and you're going to have to go where life takes you, and so my role, and the reason I'm here tonight, is again because of an event that was out of my control, that shook my life to the core, but also led to some amazing opportunities, growth, and watching love work in this world.
So we realize that this is the 11th year this week of the loss of Tammy, and I know a bit about her from what you've shared in our friendship and my participation actually in the suicide survivor support group. And she was just, I know that she was vivacious and lovely, and you loved her, absolutely loved her. And we are really sorry for your loss. But I just was wondering, what would you like us to understand, or what would you like to share with us about that?
Okay. Sure. It's an interesting story. Suicide victims have a lot of things in common with each other, but also a wide variety of backgrounds and factors in their lives that lead them to where they end up. And this Saturday is the 11th anniversary, and so I'm a little bit emotional.
Sure.
As you know, the anticipation period is very real. Your subconscious as well as your conscious is very much aware that this day is coming, and what will we do this year? How will we honor her and remember her this year? So one thing with suicide loss survivors, we really have a strong sense that our life is bifurcated into the before and after this happened, and a very, very strong sense of that. Tammy, as you said, Jan, incredible human being, loving and loved to laugh and was afraid of nothing. Independent Texas woman, she liked to claim, and and just touched a lot of lives. But she injured her shoulder, and it was months and months and months, and she couldn't fly anymore for United, and nobody had answers, and the pain would not stop, and went through everything you could think to go through for a good 8 to 10 months. And finally we got told about a procedure that would be about 95% likely to end her pain for about 2 years, which sounds amazing. and boy, sure got our interest in that doctor office. But then they told us, how they always give you the we also need to tell you about some side effects, kind of a thing that you always hear. And as son of medical people, I'm very well aware of how that works. But this was different, and they were very kind of got in our faces and said, but what we do is we inject this in the epidural layer in her spine, and if it were to leach into her spinal fluid, it will go up and it will mess with the chemicals in her brain, and she will end up with permanent severe psychosis. Permanent meaning no treatment, no cure, forever. And severe, any psychosis is severe. And so after we went and talked to Dad about that, and he explained that, yeah, they're not kidding. He was aware of that procedure, and he said it could be upwards of a 30% risk, which is extremely high. But she took it, and the next day our lives changed forever. It's 2001. So life started over there, and it became a very, very intense struggle. Just 24/7. There's a lot of manifestations of psychosis. I know you know all this, Jan. But one of them is pretty rare, but super sinister, and it's called paranoid personality disorder. And they believe it's way beyond paranoid delusions. They believe every single thing and person and event in this world is there to hurt them. And she was tormented, all day, every day, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times by everyone and everything on the radio, everything on TV, every color of car that drove by, everything had a reason why it hurt her. And is this suffering on a scale that you can't describe. It affected the family. It affected all of her relationships. Every one of us was in on it as well. Every night we'd lay our heads on the pillow, and she'd give me about 45 minutes to an hour to recount at least 30, 35 events that day, actions and words that day that I had done to torment her in explicit detail, and just excruciating. And this went on for 11 years, and there was no hope that it would ever end. And she actually talked about suicide at least once a month. She would say, Jim, it's an option. I could end this, and my hell would be over, and you could have a wife that deserved you and could love you the way you need to be and deserve to be, and the kids wouldn't have to stress out about all this. But she just, she would always remind herself that she had enough rational thought. She would remind herself, I couldn't do that to you all. And I would imagine how this must feel and would feel if it ever were to happen. And I'll tell you now, on this side of it, it's 1,000 times worse than my worst thoughts ever. In regards to intensity and longevity and complications, it's extremely complex. There's 1,000 layers to this, and it has impacts on survivors' lives that are just devastating, and just not a lot of resources. So we went on with this for, like you say, 11 years. And even though I thought about it every single day, is today the day? How will she do it? How will I find her? What will I do? I still wasn't ready. I describe it by saying I wasn't surprised when I heard that shot across the house and I found her. I wasn't surprised, but I was still shocked. And life changed in that day, in that moment, in a lot of ways.
And so in that time, I'm just wondering, what did people do that was helpful to you? And then what was hard that people didn't know what to do, or maybe what was hard about it? Is, I mean, other than, I know it was, the whole thing was really hard, but in terms of people's support and community.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's very common, and we hear a lot from survivors of this loss, is that after about 2 or 3 months, you know, the casseroles stop, the how you doing start fading off, and you've heard every possible suggestion and advice on how you know you need to deal with this, or you know, then it starts into, well, don't you think you should be over this by now, or don't you think you need to move on with your life? And whoa, you talk about hurtful words. Because people, we have to remind ourselves, and we preach this to each other all the time. They come from a place of love. They're worried about you. They care about you, but they run out of ideas to fix you. And so then they start avoiding you. And then it becomes very isolating, because you become very aware. Nobody wants to hear you talk about this. And with the stigma around mental illness and suicide that exists, you know, you're kind of a persona non grata, right? And people start avoiding you. I'll never forget coming around into an aisle at Dillon's, and at the other end I saw a couple ladies from church, and they immediately backed up and went somewhere else. And that really, you know, it kind of tickled me, but at the same time it hurt. And I imagined to myself that night, you know, what must they have said to each other? And my biggest fear was how this would affect me going forward. You know, my life was shattered. I'm crawling around on the floor trying to pick up the pieces into something that looked like the old normal, which of course is impossible. And I just imagined in my head, you know, well, that's Jim Yoder, and oh, you know, he's just never been the same since his wife died. You know, he used to be in the band and you know, and vivacious and funny and helpful and all these things, and now he's just a shell of who he was. And I thought to myself, wow, I absolutely do not want that to come to pass. And so I thought, you know, I'm going to have to get help with this. And so I found, I had always told people when they lost people in their lives, loved ones, that, and particularly widows and widowers, I knew of an outfit in Wichita named Good Grief of Kansas. And they're a nonprofit that runs a number of support groups. They have for upwards of 30 plus years at this point. And different times, different dates, different locations around the metro area. And so I would always advise, you know, hey, you know, it's helpful to be able to have people that understand that you can talk to, and that will help you with your grieving. And I thought, you know what, I need to put myself and my time where my mouth is. And so I went out to their website, and I saw that they had a survivors of suicide loss group. And I thought, boy, if that's not the exact thing I probably need, you know, so I checked it out, and, you know, it was life-changing. You know, it was targeted exactly at people like me. I was surrounded by folks that were on this same tragic journey, and, you know, we helped each other along. So not long after that, they asked me to take it over. Wasn't even quite a year yet after I had joined. And, you know, by the way that they train facilitators, they say you got to be 3 years out, and I was nowhere near that, and was very much on that first year of roller coasters, you know, emotions, and the year of the firsts, we call it, where you have the first birthday and the first anniversary and the first Mother's Day and all those days that are important. And how do you navigate that now? And then, of course, it culminates with the first anniversary of their death. So the folks that had been running the group for about 4 years were just exhausted and just couldn't do it anymore. And, you know, obviously it takes a toll. And they asked, you know, Jim, we think you can do this, and would you consider it? And I knew I wasn't ready, and I knew that I wasn't qualified by the standards. And but I remembered what my dad said to me when I was younger: those who can should, because of all those that cannot. And I knew I could do it. But up until that time, I had struggled. Every challenge I faced in my life, I always, God would get me through it, and I would somehow find the silver lining or something good that could come out of that to offset the loss, right, or the pain or the struggle. But I wasn't finding that with this. Here I was 9 or 10 months in, and every single thing about this was tragic. The effect on the kids, the grandkids, and I couldn't find anything even potentially positive. And then I realized, I'm in a unique position to understand this journey in a way that I never could have before. And so that qualifies me to help someone else when they arrive on this path. And if I can help someone, man, I need to. And maybe in that way, it can be something good that came out of it by helping others. And also a way to be a tribute and to honor Tammy by doing so. So I said yes, and away we went. And so went to some training. I threw out most of it. I already had been running the group for a few months, and I could tell that the things they were telling me you have to do as a facilitator, just in this situation with this group of people, it's not going to work. And so we've kind of charted our own path and just exploded in membership. We've had well over 1,000 people, coming up on 10 years now since I started leading this. And we all just help each other, and on the days that someone stumbles, we come alongside them, all of us, and help them to their feet. And then later they help us on a bad day. And that's how we do this. We like to say we're walking each other home. So, yeah, I remember within weeks after Tammy's death thinking, if I'm ever going to have my faith shaken or question God, it'll be now. And, I'm so lucky that didn't happen. It did not. I don't know how people do it without a faith and a trust in a higher source. I don't know how they do it. I know they do. But for me, yeah, it's that's what all this is. It's as much a ministry as anything else for me. We don't talk a lot about spiritual stuff, other than it's completely normal to have questions. It's completely normal to question God. How can a loving God allow this to happen? How could this possibly be part of God's plan for us? Right? And we talk a lot about that. And I remember at Tammy's funeral, the pastor and I very intentionally said we want to structure this funeral to first explain Tammy's illness that no one knew about because of the paranoia, and explain what happened, because that's what everybody asks, myself included. What happened here? Why did this happen? And then the second part, the pastor did a masterful job of explaining, Romans 4 and places where, God doesn't condemn suicide. Is it what he wants? Of course not. Is it a good thing? Never. But nothing can separate us from the love of God.
It's beautiful.
Our manner of death matters not.
Yeah.
So I know where she is, and that really helps me. And I know I'll see her again. So that helps me a lot.
Well, I want to give Pastor Johnson to say something. I just have to say that I, watched you through the years, and to watch your courage, your love, your compassion, your perseverance. I mean, these qualities, Jim, it's been quite a journey for you, and it's a journey watching you grow, and just thank you for your courage of sharing that today. Um, it's just tough, but what's so concerning is how much this is escalated. I know across the country in the state of Kansas. Um, what can you tell us? I know you know quite a bit about statistics and the escalation of suicide, the difficulties. Um, what would you like our audience to hear related to that?
Yeah, I went and found some current stuff. The numbers always run about a year behind. We have a first pass of numbers available for 2021. They won't officially come out till this fall, but they don't change much from this first pass to now. The one thing that I want people to understand is you will never have to look very far around you in your circle to find people that have been affected. And many people don't even realize it's happened in their own family and within the last couple generations because it's not talked about. And so it's the ultimate outcome of mental illness and not being well. And my dad, again, psychiatrist, I grew up understanding that our illnesses up here are no different than when my liver's not working correctly or my lungs aren't working correctly or some other physical thing. But the way that the stigma and our culture looks at that is completely separate. If I were to tell my boss, hey, I've got to take off next Tuesday to go get my blood pressure checked, I would have no problem telling them that. I would have no repercussions professionally or other personally, and I would not have to worry about them having any negative thoughts. But if I were to say I need to go to my counselor and talk about my depression, that changes a lot of things. And it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that. I mean, it can affect your profession. It's why you see so much problem with military suicides and law enforcement first responder suicides. Their professional culture will not allow that. You're not promotable if you have those problems. And it's not fair and it's not right. And Dad used to say, I long for the day when we get to the place where we understand that we have just as many problems when our mind is ill, if not more, than when we have physical illness. And the world just doesn't see it that way. And so that causes all sorts of problems because then people aren't free to talk about it with their friends or their loved ones or a counselor. And then it leads to things. Ultimately, the ultimate one is the suicide. And so it's just one of those things that happens. So let me give you some numbers real quick. So the first round here of 2021 results, 2020 and 21, even though COVID, in my anecdotal experience, my phone rang every day with a new survivor. I thought the numbers were skyrocketing, but the official numbers actually went down for the first time in decades, just a little bit. But in 21, they came roaring back. And so there were 48,183 in the country. That's 132 a day or one every 11 minutes. It's the 11th leading cause of death in our country. Suicide rates in Kansas are among the highest in the country. We're easily in the top 10 every year, sometimes top 5 states for suicide rates. We had 550 in 2021. Wichita had about 100, and that's a pretty standard number for them recently. It's about 100 deaths. So really, really high. More lives. This is interesting for people to realize. More lives are lost to suicide every year than traffic accidents and homicides combined. More are lost to suicide than those. We hear a lot about military veterans dying at the rate of about 22 a day, which is tragic. The only number higher is farmers. And again, no one has heard about that. But and then they usually use a number in between 12 and 20 of the number of people that are directly significantly impacted by someone dying by suicide. So that's the survivors. And another interesting fact is most people understand that more men than women die by suicide. It's actually about 4 times as many men as women die by suicide each year. But here's the interesting part: up to 4 times more women attempt suicide than do men. And firearms is the big reason for that. Men predominantly use an instant, no second chance, no calling for help, no nothing. And what we've seen in the last 3 years here then is huge jumps across the board, not just in suicides, but specifically the 11 to 18-year-old age range. The mental illness numbers are just skyrocketing. The suicide numbers are skyrocketing. And then there's been huge increases, and very surprisingly, we've never seen a jump like this in minorities. So American Indians have long been the highest rate by race of suicides, with all the challenges they face. And then whites and Caucasians. But the Black rate of suicide has jumped 20% in the last 3 years. Hispanics are up about 8%. The Black rates are almost half now what whites are. They're catching up really fast, and that's not a good thing. And back to the younger, the age 10 to 24 in the Black communities, 37% increase in 3 years. So something's happening there. They historically have not chosen suicide like they have started to. And I don't know, all the reasons why, and I'm not one of the experts on that, but I'm alarmed by it, and I hope it gets attention, and I hope that numbers get broadcast, and I hope people talk about it.
Wow. Well, one thing I'm going to comment on, Robert, what I learned when I was I'd had, several friends that had died by suicide, and I went to the support group because I was going to support my friends. And then I figured out, within being in that group, I figured out that I was carrying my own heavy, heavy grief attached to this. And how one of the unique things about suicide is that everyone in the community that is close to that person, every single person feels responsible.
Yeah.
I felt, I'm a professional. I should have known better. I should have seen this coming. It was one of the really challenging things. And I learned so much through that group. And what I did learn is we don't use the terminology, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but I think we don't use the terminology committed suicide. It's died by suicide. And what was the reasoning behind that?
Well, committed has a negative connotation, as if either a crime or a sin was committed. There's nothing in the Bible that talks about suicide being an unforgivable sin,
right,
or that keeps you from going to heaven. There's nothing in there. Suicide's mentioned, I believe, Robert could correct me, it's 37, 38 times in the Bible. And it never, many opportunities for God to say, don't, if you do this, I can't abide you. So that's a cultural thing that we don't even know why everybody believes that, but that's a separate conversation. It goes back about 900 years. But actually religions don't even have a problem with it like they used to. And so they're starting to be much better educated about that. I know the Catholic Church took it out of the canon in 1968, that it was somehow unforgivable. And so that they can now have funeral masses and be buried in Catholic cemeteries and things. So, that word needs to get out better. I remember my daughter asking me the day Tammy died, do you think she's in heaven? It's like, of course she's in heaven. But that's how prevalent that myth is, that mistaken idea is. And so, the grief is absolutely horrific in terms of the shock, the trauma, the guilt. if 11 people were heavily affected by the suicide, every one of them blames themselves. Well, they can't all have been at fault, right? I think that people don't understand about suicide is that it's never just one factor, and it's not even the last factor. People want a nice, easy story that we can just tell ourselves, and this is what happened, and then we can be happy with that. It's never that simple, and we will never know all the reasons why. For any given person, I don't know with Tammy, and I lived and breathed her illness with her for 11 years, and I saw the trauma, and I wouldn't have made it 6 months. But it's not cowardly. It's not the easy way out. She's the strongest woman I've ever met in my life. We don't talk about it the way we do other diseases. Up to 90% of suicide victims have a mental illness, even if not diagnosed. They do. Depression, bipolar, anxieties, substance abuse is a factor. Suicide is an irrational act. To overcome our will to survive takes something profound. And what happens is they get into a crisis and they get complete tunnel vision. They study tens of thousands of people who had a significant attempt to kill themselves and somehow lived. And then they ask them to explain that process of how their mind took them to that point. And they all describe that last crisis period as a tunnel, where all the other times they thought about it, the deterrent and the reason they didn't was because they had enough rational thought to say, I couldn't do this to my wife or my kids or my family. And I know that life might get better. There just might be a chance yet. But what happens when they hit that crisis in that tunnel is complete tunnel vision. And they do not think of any of that. So I explain how this happened to people, especially survivors, but also the public. And I'll do it here real quickly. Call it my 9/11 analogy. You remember 9/11 and the planes hit the towers and they were on fire. And you remember the people hanging out the windows. And you remember when they jumped. So the first question was that suicide? Kind of a tricky question, right? I mean, if you jump from that height, the laws of physics, you will die. And you know that. Okay, second question. Were they thinking of their loved ones when they jumped? And the answer based on all that research is no. So think about when you've touched a hot stove. Did you have to have a conscious decision and action to pull your hand off of that? Or was it a reflexive action, a response to the pain? Okay. If somebody comes at your face and you're going to blink, you don't tell your eyelids to shut. It just happens, right? It's a reflexive action rather than a conscious one. So those folks those poor people on the towers, when those flames got to them and they started to burn, they just let go. And 20 minutes earlier or an hour, they called their loved ones and said, hey, the building's on fire, but the firemen are coming. I'm sure we'll be okay, but I love you, just in case. But of course they thought about their loved ones. But in that crisis, as the flames got to them, it was a reflexive action. It was a response to pain. And just because you and I can't see Tammy and these other people's pain doesn't mean that it wasn't profoundly real to them. And that's what the act of suicide is. It's letting go of that windowsill. They see everything as pain that will never end, and there's only one way to stop it. Life boils down to that tunnel and that decision, and then it's over. And it can happen very quickly. So that's what I want people to understand. These people were brave. We talk about someone loses their battle with cancer, and they fought bravely with their heart disease and their problems. That's really how we should talk about suicide victims. They lost their battle with depression or mental illness or suicidal ideation. They fought bravely as long as they could until they couldn't. That's simple. That's simple.
What do you think that the church, what would you like to see the church be about and to help with this whole mental health issue that we have?
Well, it goes back to that stigma. The church is just a representation of our larger culture, is it not? And if the rest of society doesn't understand or equate mental illness with physical illness, the church doesn't either. In fact, churches can sometimes be worse. There's people that believe you can pray your problems away, or that it's a reflection of a weakness or a spiritual defect, or you're not walking with the Lord, or the list goes on, and none of that's true. But that stigma keeps people from sharing. And if you can't go share with your church and have people pray for you, wow, you really are alone.
That's what I think happens to a lot of those farmers. And by the way, Jim, thank you for your work. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for your commitment to serve. Thank you for your willingness to show the love of God and Christ in you in one of the most difficult positions I can imagine. And so I admire your resolve. I admire your love. But I've heard a lot about the farmers. And here you got a guy that's tough as a nail, knows how to do everything, prides himself in being able to survive on his own, and he gets underwater oftentimes with financially because of the humongous costs involved in farming.
Right.
And if you end up mortgaging the farm and you end up starting to lose the farm, you're a complete failure. Your dad wouldn't be proud of you. Your grandfather, everybody depends on you, and you get to the place where you say, well, if I kill myself, they have enough money at least to survive. This is how men think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really amazing that farmers, who most people think of as very self-reliant and tough people, are one of the most severely affected. So my question to you is, how do you see the warning signs? What can we do as people, as a church, as an individual, to perhaps save somebody's life by knowing the warning signs and the ways to proceed?
Sure. And the people closest to a person who's struggling is always who needs to know what to watch for. The problem is that we see with the survivors is they all use this hindsight bias, where as we immediately thrust ourselves into learning more about suicide and why does it happen and understanding mental illness and all those things, and then we're looking back at what happened 11 years ago or 11 days ago or 11 months ago, and we're holding ourselves to a standard that we now have more knowledge about maybe some of the signs, but we didn't know those then. And it's not fair to beat ourselves up and feel guilty for something we did not know. Like everything in life, and my dad used to use this phrase all the time, people every day, all day, are doing the best they can. It may not be good enough for you. It may not be good enough for society. It may not even be good enough for them, but they're doing the best they can. We got to cut people some slack, and we got to cut ourselves some slack. Okay. Yeah. So, the farmers, two major problems with farmers for this type of risk is that they are independent and they've always had to find a way to fix stuff themselves. And they've been good at it, and they can't fix this. The other thing is that 95% of the factors that make them successful or unsuccessful in their vocation is out of their control. They can't control the weather. They can't control farm commodity prices. They can't, all of that's out of their control. What a helpless place to be. And they also just don't have resources out in rural areas. We don't have enough resources in Wichita. How would you have any out in the middle of a county with 1,000 people, right? So all of those stacked together is what leads to this. And, thanks for bringing that up, Dan. And
I think it's hard for a farmer, like everybody, but a farmer, there's so much in your family that you feel like I know this because I live with farmers and I've talked with them, and they don't want to, it's the worst thing in the world for them to do, to admit defeat. Yeah. They've lost, they because of things outside of their control.
Yeah.
Then they feel like they've completely are a disgrace to their family, and they get hopeless, and they say, I'm just going to end it. They'll have some money. They'll be better off without me. Like your wife said, better off without me.
Almost 100% of suicide victims will have said and they struggle with this idea that everyone around them is suffering from their problems, and therefore they would be better off without me.
Yeah.
Very, very, very common. Okay. So as far as some signs for people to pay attention to, anything that looks like depression, sleeplessness, change of habits, drastic mood changes, if they talk at all about suicide, even joking about it, take that seriously. If they say I can't take it anymore, if they start giving away prized possessions, you're getting real close to a crisis point. Why would he give that dog away? He loves that dog, or his Xbox, or whatever it is, right? And increased substance abuse, that sort of a thing. At any point you even suspect somebody is at risk in your world, get rid of the guns and any other lethal means you can think of. The studies have shown that if I were to have hidden Tammy's little pistol in a different part of the house, in the 10 minutes or 15 minutes that it might have taken her to find it, the rational thought would have come back and she would have been able to be okay. Another thing that people don't understand is that folks that have attempted suicide, high percentage, well above 75%, never attempt again. It's not a repeat till you get it done thing. It can be, but most of the time it's absolutely not. So use our resources. That 988 number, it used to be the suicide hotline. Now it's 988. Simple to remember. There's been a 30% increase since last summer when it came online in the number of calls. The problem is we don't fund it. We don't have enough people to answer the phones, and we do not have enough therapists to be able to take appointments. I've got people in crisis that can't get an appointment within 6 months. That doesn't help you now.
Right.
So there's a lot of improvements we need to make, but we need to take it seriously, and we need to do what it takes as a society to address mental illness in all its forms, and that alone will solve a lot of the suicide problem, as well as all the people who aren't suicidal that struggle.
Robert, what do you think the church could do in your role to be a ameliorating force, something that could possibly step in and make a positive difference? How can not just your church, but how can, quote unquote, the church, how can people that purpose to follow Christ, what can we do in your opinion?
So I think Jim mentioned that there's been some improvement among churches in terms of how they view suicide. I think that is a reflection of the fact that there's growth among many in the church, in Christendom, in the church world, about mental illness in general. It's talked about more. Churches are doing more to organize and help people get the help they need to destigmatize mental illness. And it happened, a lot of that growth happened during COVID, interesting enough. And I think churches when they took their focus off of filling buildings and putting on programs, that they started paying attention to human issues that people are really dealing with. And so you had more conversations happening. There was a lot more talk about mental illness in general and how can the church support that. I've heard a lot more about that in the community as well, by the way. So that's one thing. Number two is that I think the importance of community. So I will tell you that I was speaking with a lady yesterday. She's a person here in the Wichita community. She's been here. This lady is close to 80 years of age. She's been in Wichita for at least 60 years. She's been a part of the community. She's got this network. And yet here I am. I just got here 7 years ago to Wichita. I'm still meeting people. But as I was talking with her, she felt, now whether this is true or not, because she was having some demonstrating some symptoms of mental illness in general. But I do know that she just couldn't name to me people that she felt like she could cry out to or she could go to and really be open. She named 2 people and she says, oh, but this person's going through their own stuff and this person's just going through this, so I don't want to bother them. And I'm like, hey, you mean to tell me in 50 years you don't have community? And that's heartbreaking. But I know that it's also true, Jan, Dan, and Jim. I know that. And that's part of what I've been working on so hard on is, guys, like, if the kingdom is about community, first of all. And I'm not talking about community to do a worship service, a community to do a program. I'm talking about living together in community, building authentic relationships. And so one of the big saddest things for me as a pastor is to see people who are part of a church, but when they're going through the roughest times, they don't feel like they have community, because that's the point of church. Like,
Mhm.
the point of being a part of a church, more important, and I would say more important than worship, more important than participating in all activities, is that you're building community and you're doing life together. And it doesn't, you'll be surprised how much it happens. As a matter of fact, look at how many pastor stories we hear about even pastors committing suicide. And it's always people out, the comment, Jim, is always, man, and he had a fast growing church. Or wow, she had a big church.
Yeah.
So it's as if like a certain level of success protects you from mental illness of any kind.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that points to the fact that we're doing church in a way that something's happening, but we're not doing a great job in many places
Yeah.
of building real community where people really feel connected. And so if I can stick just a little testimony in there for myself. So I've battled mild depression all of my life, and I think I'd inherited. My dad was that way. When I was growing up as a kid, my dad was faithful. He came. I mean, he was. There was never a day when our family had to wonder where my dad was as an African American kid. It was 5 kids and my mom. We knew my dad was faithful. He loved God. He led his family, but he battled depression. I didn't understand it, but he'd have these periods where he would just kind of disconnect emotionally. He'd go work. He'd come home. And he was disconnected, and we were like, what's wrong with dad? We'd be asking, what's wrong with dad? And then as I became an adult, I started having and then I started realizing, oh, this is what was happening with dad. But here's the thing. Even after I started the process to become a pastor, the ordination process in the United Methodist Church. Even after I became a pastor, that somehow being a pastor, I didn't see that as being a part of a community. It was like these functions that I performed. It was these duties that I did for other people, but I don't do life with them. And dealing with the chronic mild depression didn't change until my wife and I started participating in community with other people. And so that's a long answer to, is just to say that I think churches have to be much more intentional about creating community,
Yeah.
and helping people to understand that if you don't do anything else, make sure you get connected with some people and that you open up your life to them. You do life with them. You share life together, because that's what this is really all about.
Bingo. Well said. And that's one of the maybe one of the facilitator rules that I break the most blatantly, and that is fostering the community of survivors. My dad taught me that nothing bonds human beings more permanently or strongly than surviving a shared crisis, and be that soldiers in a battle that come out together, or that family with a house fire or a flood, or Dad used to joke about a 2-week family vacation in the car. But it bonds people. And what I realized is, in this group of all these people that have virtually nothing else in common, by the we're well over 1,000. They instantly bond with each other within seconds of saying, my name is Jim. I lost my wife, Tammy, 11 years ago. My life has been different ever since. And instantly, people will bond with you. And it is the most authentic, non-judgmental group of people you will ever meet in your life, bar none.
Wow.
And it's just profound. And, unresolved grief is a killer. It affects people physically. It decimates them emotionally. And, my dad used to say his specialty was depression. And he said upwards of 90% of his patients, the single biggest factor beyond the chemicals when those were in play was unresolved grief. And he said, once we addressed that, and once we opened that up and faced it, he said they didn't need medicine anymore. It was a whole different world for them. And I've had folks come to this group 10, 20, 30, I think 38 years after a suicide, never having faced it. Just we're taught in our culture that you keep a stiff upper lip, you stay busy, and you don't think about it, and you move on with your life. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It will come back, and it'll cause health issues and strokes and high blood pressure and depression and substance abuse and all marital, everything. So that's one thing we encourage each other. Let's face this. We as survivors of this loss are at astronomically higher rates of our own suicides following on. And we've seen it in families. We've seen it through the generations. We've seen a spread within weeks or months from a suicide between cousins and brothers and other things. And there was a study done, and it called me out in the summary. A white male in his 50s lost his wife to, she died. Any cause. I have an 11 times higher chance of killing myself because of losing my wife. And the fact that she killed herself jacks me up to 47 times the national average chance of killing myself. So I always considered my work to be in the bereavement and the learning how to carry this loss in a way that can allow us to be healthy and have purpose and future and happiness and joy. It's prevention. It's prevention within our own community. And thank God and we have not lost anybody in this group. And by the statistics, we should have lost over 150 by now. And the numbers don't lie. We've had lots of close calls. This is devastating on a whole different scale. And I pray people listening tonight will never have to know this journey.
Yeah. Tell me about the organization that sponsors this and how we could help or put the word out, and how can we get it funded? Because it seems to me what you're doing is a way to, prevent the community that you have there. I was going to ask you how you did deal with it. Was it the SOS program that enabled you to sort of deal with it?
Sure.
And then part two, how do we connect into that group, and what can we do to help? And
if you go on the web, it's called Good Grief of Kansas. Any of us Peanuts lovers will remember Good Grief, and so it's aptly named. It was founded over 30 years ago. It's a nonprofit, and we are destitute from a financial standpoint. I'll be honest. I'm actually on the board now, and we are flat out. And it's all volunteer. Nobody gets paid anything. And all the grants have long dried up. There's no state funding, no county funding, no city funding, no federal funding available. Hasn't been for upwards of a decade. And donations are hit and miss and come and go. So if you go to goodgriefofkansas.org, all spelled out in one long strung together word, as they do, you can donate there online. We don't do a lot of fundraising. A lot of the grants that are available are very, very program specific, and it's very hard to quantify. Just in my group, how can I have a program that's going to have specific expenses that they can address, and then I can show how I spent the money to achieve an outcome of, whatever that metric might be. It's almost impossible to write for grants. We've actually hired people to help find grants, and it just doesn't work this way for programs like ours. So,
question then, I got to ask this. It would seem to me the state of Kansas has a little over $1.5 billion in surplus this year, and the county has money they use for, I know, all kinds of social services, not to mention the city. This seems to me one of the most compelling groups that you'd want to support on from a public health standpoint to protect future suicides.
Sure.
What in the heck is wrong with our what can we need? Light a fire under those people. I'm sure you've tried. So tell us. And then the churches. You'd think the churches would want to get together and say, hey, this is our we're going to kick in a few $1,000s a year to support this. So I guess I'm asking, what can we do to let people know that there's a way to help you or somehow get that going?
And before he answers, I want to say this, what you just said about, I just want to, because for those who are listening, who are part of a church community, I'm challenging you, because with this issue, depression, suicide, mental illness, and other issues, many churches, and this is not, I'm not criticizing the way like and without hope. I'm saying this in a way to challenge us to do better. We're very good in churches as long as people don't really need us.
Yeah.
Like we love new members and we can love on them and celebrate them as long as they're just coming and they don't need. But in many churches, the moment people really begin to need us, we don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
And I think, so let's get equipped. Let's get prepared. Let's pay attention. Let's do what we need to do so we don't have to keep turning our backs on the people who are really hurting when they really need us. So Dan, I just wanted to let's add that in and to set up his answer to your question.
Yeah. And it's like everything else. It comes down to awareness. Every time a public figure, a famous person dies by suicide, as tragic as it is, it's also an opportunity for people to talk about this and maybe be aware and maybe increase some understanding and some awareness. And I do the same thing in regards to our group. I want people to understand how they can support these survivors because they do not know what to say and it's not their fault. So what are the things that we can do to help these folks, So that's any chance I get to help increase awareness and understanding, I will. Same for Good Grief of Kansas.
Well, I'm going to tell to my legislator, I'll tell you that for sure. And I look forward to meeting you personally.
Yeah.
Because I think that an organization like that, we either have to have an event at Prairie Hill and raise some money for you or get the state involved. And the state makes more sense because they do have the deep pockets. And if we spent a tenth, I get on my soapbox here, but we got so many people in prison and we spend ungodly amounts of money on the prison system. It seems to me that we ought to be doing something in this area for public health and public safety. And so make aware, thank you for doing it, because if you weren't doing it, I couldn't even know the need was there, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, to kind of echo what Pastor Robert said, we don't like being made to feel uncomfortable or helpless and in our churches or in our world. And, we don't know how to help. And the problem, the second thing he said was we don't build enough community. And what I've seen with grievers, be it any cause of death, is it becomes very isolating because it's not an area that's comfortable. Grief is just another part of love, and it's an inevitable part of the love we have. And it's the cost of what that love gave us.
Wow.
And the more we love, the harder we shall grieve. And that's okay.
That's okay.
That's okay. And we talk a lot about the fact that we really can learn as we learn to carry this grief, because we're not going to ever be over it. We're not ever going to move past it. It will affect us and we will be sad and we will be without answers the rest of our lives. And we know that. So that other idea that you get over it is impossible, right? But it's not all lost, because what we do is we focus on how to carry it. And that's a very individual thing. Jan, I know you've had many losses to suicide in your life across a wide spectrum of relationships. And we're affected by that. And you have to learn for yourself what you do when you get brought to your knees because a song came on the radio or something reminds you, every time I have a new grandchild and she's not here, but I've learned how to, process that and to face it. Grief isn't that scary, really. It's painful, but lots of things in life are painful. But you know what? You can grow as you grieve. And we all realize as survivors that we'll never be the same person we were. But that doesn't mean that we're less or that we're negative. I am now more than I was before. I know that. Yeah, I'm more compassionate. I'm more empathetic. I'm more helpful. I'm more aware and sensitive to people struggling. I may not know why. I may never know why. But that makes me a better person.
Yeah.
And that's something all of us can do.
We all can do. That's a scripture that says, and I don't know I can't remember the exact place in the New Testament, but it says, we do not grieve as those who have no hope.
Exactly.
And we always immediately our minds go to God, and they should, but it says we. So Paul is talking to a community of people. So we do not grieve as those who have no. So it's not just God. It's that because we also grieve in community. We have people who help, who abide with us in our pain and our grief, and we
Right.
learn that it's okay. I will tell you one of the things that God. I had a sister who died at the age of 46,
Mm.
Jim, and it was heartbreaking. I talk about that in the book, and I've told this story. But that was the first time my faith had been challenged. I stood at her gravesite and really fell apart
Mm.
theologically, mentally, emotionally, because it just felt so final. And then she was such a believer because when I would go visit her, she was in Mississippi. I was here in Kansas, in Texas. And every time I got a chance to go visit her, I would go and she would tell me to read the scripture that says, I will live and not die. And so I'm like, God, like, what are you doing? Like, she believed you for that. And here she's dead at 46.
Yeah.
And then as I was working through that, the Holy Spirit said to me, there's nothing wrong with grieving. Like Cassandra is worth every tear you will cry for the rest of your life. And so then my tears turn to a kind of celebration. So, and I think about it every day, and I get choked up every time I think about it.
Mhm.
But now I say, Cassandra, I just say, Cassandra, I miss you and I love you, and I'm still crying because it's just so. And then the Lord says, the Holy Spirit says, and don't you want to be? Wouldn't you want to be remembered the same way?
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
You continue to express your love. You
Yeah.
continue to have a connection with her, and you continue to have a relationship with her. It's
Yeah.
just we can't hold her,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But that's what buoys us. That's what keeps us going. Is that they're not gone.
Right.
They're just gone from our sight.
Yeah.
They're not gone from our heart.
Yeah.
Now abideth faith, hope, and charity. And the greatest of those, of course, is charity, but hope is right there.
It's right
Yeah.
there.
And hope could spend the rest of the night talking about hope.
Yeah.
And I know when I lost my wife, that's been close 7 years ago, to cancer after 5 years, watching her suffer, as odd as it feels, it was like I just didn't want to see her suffer anymore.
Right.
And I don't know if I'm still struggling through the reality of all of what occurred then. Life keeps moving on, of course. And so, Jim, what can we do to help you? I mean, I want to let you know that we're here as a community for you as well. I want to be your friend. I want to get to know you better. And I want to hang out with people like you because you got a heart as big as the world. And I just love you. Thank you. What can we do to help you?
Well, you always got to start with prayer, because you can do that anywhere, anytime. and it matters. It really does. And I always covet people's prayers and well wishes. And so, just spread the word. When you find out about a suicide, that's one thing that I did that grew the group the fastest, is I really marketed us when I took over. I went to like the ministerial alliances and met with all those pastors that get together once every month or two. And I got on the agenda and I said, hey, here's my card. Here's a brochure. This group is out there. Send folks our way when they need more help than maybe you can give, because they're surrounded by the only people in their lives that get it. And it's profound, the difference it makes for them, because they know that these people have their back and want them to be okay. And so I did that. I met with all the funeral directors. I met with multiple police departments. Get this information out there. Spread the word about the group. There's so many people. Like I say, my phone rings virtually every day with a new survivor, and it I don't even know anymore where they all found out about us. But keep spreading the word, because people are like, oh, I wish I would have found you 2 years ago. I suffered for 2 years, and now I see hope. And I wish I would have known about the group sooner. So just help spread the word.
Where do you meet?
We meet every Monday night at Riverwalk Church of Christ down at First and Waco.
Okay.
And they're gracious enough to let us use the back part of that church, and We've had as many as 45 in a meeting, which is way too many. And, usually average anywhere from 12 to 20, 25. And incredible group of people.
What's the name of the church, Jim?
Riverwalk, 225 North Waco. Yeah. And you can see that information on goodgriefofkansas.org as well.
And what time?
We meet every Monday at 6:30. We're one of only 2 groups right now in the country that meet every week. And it has to be every week. This becomes a needed part of everybody's routine. If they miss a week, they're just like, can't wait to get back the next Monday. We need each other. It's more of a family and a tribe. Jan knows this, than it is a support group. You instantly feel like you're part of a family. I was not a hugger. I did not grow up that way, and buddy, I had to learn. And now I see the value in them. But it's an extremely loving, compassionate group of people.
Well, Jim, I'm just a bit overwhelmed and so moved again by you and your heart and the ministry that you have, the impact you have on people's lives, how you've turned your very point of utmost pain and suffering, and you've turned it into something to love and care and help others heal. I know is what I just, before we go, I do want to ask you about healing. What is your sense about that? I mean, it really never, this grief is with you forever. And I know that never goes away. And what is your approach to healing the heart from grief?
Yeah, so the worst complications of grief and the way that they manifest, you don't see it this way, but this is really the bottom line. It's a battle between what you know and what you feel.
Mm.
And those two will do battle to no end. And to understand that, to accept that's how it works. And you know what? It's okay that my heart can't let go all the way. It's okay that my heart still loves her. It's okay. I don't need to explain it away. It's not a problem.
That's right.
Okay. Can it be painful? You bet. I'm a professional crier now. Yeah. But that's okay too. Those tears are memories. Those tears are the joy of the blessing that she was in my life. And as much hell as that 11 years was, watching her suffer and honestly suffering myself, I would do it all again. Mm-hmm. Because that's what love does. I remember when she first got sick, and all the psychiatrists, for a couple months, she would try them one time and then she would not go back. And we'd try another one and then she would not go back. And then she just gave up, and we knew that was inevitable because of the paranoia. She couldn't trust them. But every one of them took me aside and said, Jim, you need to go get divorced like in the next 6 months. We have never seen or experienced or even read about a marriage that has made it 6 months with this paranoid personality disorder. It will end this really fast. Get it in order and get it done. Dad helped me see that I could do it. And I take my vows seriously. And I needed to be an example to my children who were the only ones that knew what was going on. That when I say till death do us part, and good times and bad, and sickness and in health, that has to mean something. Love doesn't run away. Love digs in.
Wow.
And tries everything it can to help the other. That's what love does. Look what Jesus did for us.
Yes.
I can never fathom that degree of love, but by gum, I'm going to try as hard as I can from my human perspective. And it started with my wife, and it goes with my children, and it goes with my people in my group. These are the most important people in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Well, we have witnessed tonight of God's love through Jim Yoder. This has been such an incredible blessing tonight, Jim. I think Pastor Johnson, I'm going to turn it over to you. I don't have words. I just don't. I love you, Jim Yoder. I appreciate you. I love the ministry I see. I love your heart. I love the way you love the people in your life. And I just thank you for being you, for hanging on to your faith and your hope, and just persevering. I appreciate you so much.
I sing in a gospel group, and nine of us men, and we have a song called "Through," and we introduce it by talking about how God doesn't promise to take us out of our struggles or to take the challenges away or to rescue us from them, but He does promise to take us through them, and that He will walk with us and provide us the strength. And that can be from fellow believers. That can be through any way that, all the ways that are at His disposal that go far beyond my understanding. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be part of that for everyone else.
I can see that. We see that. We see you. Appreciate you.
Yes, thank you so much, Jim. I will mention too, a few years ago, my daughter, at the time, she was a college student coming out of high school, introduced me to a song, and she says, "Dad, you got to hear this song." And it was a song, she says, it's like blowing up among young adults. Like it's at the top of Billboard and all the charts. And it was a song, the title of it was 1-800-273-8255,
Yeah.
which is the, and someone had written a song, and that song was like kids were hearing that and they were calling into that line, getting the help they
Right.
needed.
And now that's 988. They've shortened it down where we can remember it, right? And
Wow.
and the other thing about that, real quick, before we leave, I know we're over on time, is that 988 number is not just for suicidal crises. It's also for any mental crisis.
Yeah.
And it's for those of us trying to help someone in those situations.
Wow.
And we can not only get the support of talking about, here's what I'm seeing, what do I do? They also can help us understand how to be helpful then to the person that we love.
Yeah.
So lots and lots of people can benefit from that line. Don't neglect to call it because you think that it's not for you. If you're trying to help someone else, if you're struggling with your own stuff, either way, just call. You can also text.
Mm-hmm.
For the youngsters.
Wow.
I don't know how to conclude this other than to say this has been one of the most heart-touching discussions, and we've had some very good ones on this program, Jim. Thank you for your time. Thank you for giving of your life as you have. And as you know, in the end, God sees what you're doing, and it's as big of a ministry to serve people in the capacity you are as anything I know. So God bless you. Thank you for your service.
Well, I'll sign off with one of my favorite quotes from my dad, and he had many. Very wise man. Remember and focus on what is truly important in life. Except for people, most of that cannot be seen.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a great quote.
Jan, you want to conclude?
Oh, I think I'll let you or Pastor Robert conclude.
Robert, you go ahead. You got it.
We are concluded. We're done.
Okay. Well, then in that case, I would just like to say to anybody listening, if there is anybody you know that we could help, call that number and let's all stand for each other. We've all struggled, I know, in our own lives, but let's stand and make sure our friends and our relatives and those that we are around, that we can be there for them. I think the community, the disconnectedness is so, we get used to it, but it's not really the way we're supposed to be living. We're supposed to be living in close community, as you've said, Robert. Mm-hmm. So I just hope that this program can be, if it helps one person, then good deal. And let's see if we can stand with each other in prayer and promote one another's good works, that what we're doing, especially Jim's here, because that's something that I'd like to stand with you with, Jim, and what you're doing. So thank you, sir, for your service, and God bless all of you. Thank you for everybody listening in. We'll see you next week.
God bless. He loves. Love is all around. God's love is with us no matter what.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.